January 1972. A brutal storm buries the French Alps in ice and snow. The world's fastest rally cars, Porsche 911s, Alpine Renaults with 230 horsepower, are stuck spinning their wheels in the dark. Then, out of the whiteout, comes something nobody expected to win. A small, elegant, front-wheel drive coupe, built by a company more famous for luxury saloons than speed. This is the story of the Lancia Fulvia, a car built for comfort that became a giant killer, humiliated the biggest names in motorsport, and quietly changed rallying forever. This is how a gentleman's car shocked the world. Stick around till the end, and if you love stories like this, hit subscribe, because we dig up one of these forgotten automotive legends every single week. To understand why the Fulvia's victory was so shocking, you have to understand what kind of car it actually was. Luxury, not speed, was Lancia's reputation going into the 1960s. Founded in 1906, the Turin manufacturer had built its name on refined engineering, plush interiors, and quiet, well-mannered performance. The kind of brand an Italian doctor or lawyer bought, not the kind a rally driver dreamed about. The Lancia Fulvia fit that mold perfectly. It debuted at the Geneva Motor Show in 1963, designed under engineer Antonio Fessia, and it was meant to replace the aging Lancia Appia, a refined, comfortable, slightly conservative car for well-off Italian professionals. The coupe version came 2 years later. Penned by designer Piero Castagnero and launched in 1965, it was gorgeous in an understated way. Clean lines, a glass-house cabin with thin pillars for panoramic visibility, and a wooden dashboard inside that looked more like a gentleman's study than a cockpit. Road testers of the era praised its poise and its precision, words usually reserved for grand tourers, not giant killers. Under the hood sat a narrow-angle V4 engine, a quirky Lancia trademark dating back decades. It wasn't powerful, it wasn't loud, and unlike almost every serious performance car of the era, the Fulvia sent its power to the front wheels instead of the rear, a layout nobody associated with winning. Front-wheel drive at the time was considered a compromise for economy cars, not competition machines. Rally cars were supposed to be brutish, rear-wheel drive, tail-happy monsters that experts could throw sideways through corners with a boot full of opposite lock. Next to those cars, the Fulvia looked soft, domestic, the opposite of a winner. Yet a small group of enthusiasts inside Lancia saw something everyone else missed. In February 1963, a young manager named Cesare Fiorio relaunched Lancia's racing division, known as Squadra Corse HF, HF standing for High Fidelity, a nod to the passionate loyalty of Lancia's fans. Fiorio wasn't chasing the biggest engine on the grid, he was chasing the smartest car on the grid, and he believed the humble, unassuming Fulvia had a secret weapon hiding in plain sight, one that nobody else in rallying had thought to exploit. That secret was weight and traction, not power. Proving it, though, would take almost a decade of development, several rounds of engine upgrades, and dozens of hard-fought races before the rest of the world would understand exactly what Fiorio had seen from the very beginning. It helped that Lancia already had motorsport in its blood, even if that history had been largely forgotten by the early 1960s. Company founder Vincenzo Lancia had been a racing driver himself before starting the company in 1906, and under his son Gianni, in the early 1950s, Lancia's works team had briefly dominated Grand Prix racing and endurance events, with legends like Alberto Ascari behind the wheel. Financial trouble forced the factory out of top-level competition by the mid-1950s, and by the time Fiorio arrived, Squadra Corse HF was less an official department than a passion project, funded on a shoestring, staffed by true believers, and largely ignored by the wider industry. Nobody expected a comeback to start with a car this unassuming. Antonio Fessia, the engineer behind the Fulvia's road-going design, wasn't a motorsport man at all. He came from an academic and industrial background, and his priorities were refinement, ride comfort, and mechanical elegance rather than lap times. That narrow-angle V4 under the bonnet, canted at a shallow angle unique to Lancia, existed to keep the engine compact and smooth running for everyday driving, not to win races. It's a strange origin story for a giant killer. The very design choices meant to make the Fulvia a pleasant commuter car for professionals turned out, almost by accident, to be exactly what a rally car needed on ice. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was a rally-winning Lancia. The Fulvia's competition career started with a slow, steady climb, rather than a bang. Its racing debut came at the 1965 Tour de Corse, a brutal event nicknamed the Rally of 10,000 Corners for its endless coastal switchbacks. From there, the factory team began building dedicated performance versions badged HF, first a 1.2-litre, then in 1967 a 1.3-litre Rally 1.3 HF, and finally, in 1968, the definitive version, the 1.6 HF, built around an all-new 1.6-litre V4 engine. Each step was incremental, methodical, almost stubborn, exactly the way Fiorio liked to work. Chasing raw horsepower was never the point. The most powerful works version, later nicknamed Fan Alone, Italian for big headlight, thanks to its oversized round driving lamps, produced around 130 horsepower, modest next to its rivals, and downright puny compared to some. Lancia's engineers instead obsessed over something the competition largely ignored: shedding weight, ounce by ounce, wherever they possibly could. Bonnets and doors were built from a special aluminum alloy called Peralumen. Interior trim was pared down. Every unnecessary gram was hunted out and stripped away. The result was a car weighing barely over 800 kilograms, featherlight next to the heavier, more powerful Porsches and Alpines it would eventually face on the same starting line. Here is where Fiorio's insight finally came together. With the engine mounted up front, driving the front wheels, and the whole car weighing almost nothing, the Fulvia had something none of its rivals possessed: incredible grip in exactly the conditions where grip mattered most: ice, snow, and loose mud. Rear-wheel drive cars of the era relied on raw power to claw traction out of a corner, and on dry tarmac, that formula was close to unbeatable. But on slippery surfaces, that same power became a liability. Rear wheels would spin uselessly, while the car's tail swung wide, fighting for control. The Fulvia's front-heavy, front-driven layout instead pressed its weight directly over the wheels, doing the steering and the pulling, letting it claw forward with a stability that heavier, more powerful cars simply couldn't replicate. Almost nobody believed this mattered yet. The proof was still years away, waiting for the coldest night in rally history. Along the way, the Fulvia HF quietly racked up results that should have served as warning signs to its rivals. It won its class and finished strongly overall at events like the Tour de Corse and the Tour de France Automobile, and it took the Italian Rally Championship title in nearly every season from 1965 through 1973. Rival teams noticed the results, but dismissed the reasons behind them, chalking it up to home advantage or lucky weather, rather than a genuine engineering edge. That underestimation would turn out to be one of the biggest mistakes anyone made all decade. Behind the scenes, the engineering kept sharpening. Suspension geometry was reworked season after season to sharpen turn-in without upsetting the car's balance on loose surfaces. Brakes, gear ratios, and differential settings were all tuned specifically around low grip conditions rather than outright top speed, a philosophy almost nobody else in rallying was following at the time. Most rival manufacturers were still chasing bigger engines and wider tires. Lancia's small team was chasing something closer to a physics equation and steadily closing in on the answer. By January 1972, the Fulvia had already built a quiet but formidable resume, having won the Italian Rally Championship almost every year since 1965. Still, the Monte Carlo Rally was different. It was the biggest, most prestigious event in the sport, and that year, it was being contested by two of the most powerful factory teams ever assembled: Porsche, with its all-conquering 911s, and Alpine Renault, with lightweight rear-engined rockets producing up to 230 horsepower, nearly double what the little Lancia had under its bonnet. On paper, it wasn't close. Then the weather turned biblical. On the night of January 28th, an apocalyptic winter storm hit the Alpes-Maritimes region of southern France. Sandro Munari, the driver Lancia was counting on, had grown up racing on Italian mountain roads, but nothing quite prepared anyone for what came next. On the legendary Col de Turini, the most feared stage in world rallying, a narrow ribbon of hairpins clinging to a mountainside, freezing rain turned to blinding, relentless snow. The road became a sheet of black ice threading through switchback after switchback, with sheer drops waiting just beyond the guardrails. Conditions were so extreme that several drivers openly considered the mountain unraceable and backed off. Spectators who normally lined the route to watch the cars scream past stayed home. The few who braved the cold later described headlights barely cutting 10 feet into the whiteout, and marshals struggling just to keep the road itself visible under the drifting snow. This was the exact moment Cesare Fiorio had been waiting for all along. While the powerful Porsches and Alpines wrestled helplessly with wheel spin, unable to put their horsepower down on the frozen tarmac, Lancia's driver Sandro Munari and co-driver Mario Menucci pushed their Fulvia 1.6 HF, car number 14, through the storm with startling composure. Headlights cutting through horizontal snow, tires biting where heavier cars simply slid, the light front-wheel drive coupe gripped the mountain like it had been built for exactly this night. Menucci called the pace notes over the intercom while Munari worked the wheel, the two of them moving through the storm with the practiced calm of a team that had rehearsed this exact scenario 100 times, even if neither of them had ever seen conditions quite this bad. Corner after corner, hairpin after hairpin, the gentleman's car that nobody feared began carving through the darkness like it belonged there, and, increasingly, like it was going to win. By the time the sun rose over the mountains, the result was almost unbelievable. Munari and Menucci's Fulvia had beaten the factory Porsches and Alpines outright, delivering Lancia the win at the 1972 Monte Carlo rally, one of the most stunning upsets in the history of the sport, and a result that stunned even Lancia's own engineers. Journalists covering the event scrambled to explain it. Some rival teams initially blamed tire choice, others blamed sheer luck, insisting no small, modestly powered coupe could genuinely outdrive Works Porsches and Alpines on merit alone. But the finishing order didn't lie, and the following seasons only reinforced the point. This wasn't a fluke born of one freak snowstorm, but a genuine, repeatable advantage that Cesare Fiorio had been quietly banking on since 1963. Word of the win spread fast, and it didn't just make headlines, it changed the direction of an entire company. Sales of the road-going Fulvia had been fading for a while. The car was nearly a decade old by 1972, and buyers were drifting toward newer designs. Almost overnight, the Monte Carlo win breathed fresh commercial life into it. Lancia extended production, and just weeks later at the Geneva Motor Show, the company unveiled a special road-going tribute, the Fulvia Coupe Monte Carlo, finished in racing red with matte black accents and rally plate-style decals on the bonnet, celebrating the victory that had just stunned the world. Thousands of ordinary buyers, who'd never sit behind a rally wheel, wanted a piece of what Munari had done on that mountain. But the bigger legacy went far beyond one model or one showroom special. That single night on the Col de Turini proved, in front of the entire motorsport world, that lightweight, smart engineering and front-wheel drive traction could beat brute horsepower once conditions got hard enough. It validated everything Cesare Fiorio and the Squadra Corse HF engineers had believed for the better part of a decade, and it cemented the reputation of Lancia's rally division as a team that could outthink, not just outpower, its rivals. Success on the stages continued for a few more seasons. Lancia went on to claim the International Championship for Manufacturers that same year, and the Fulvia kept scoring points into 1973 and beyond. Even so, its era was drawing to a close. During 1974, the aging Fulvia was finally phased out of top-level factory competition, handing the torch to its spiritual successor, the wild, mid-engined Lancia Stratos, a car purpose-built for rallying from a blank sheet of paper, something the humble Fulvia, born as a comfortable coupe for Italian professionals, was never meant to be. Where the Fulvia had won by outthinking the field with a car never designed for competition, the Stratos was built with nothing but competition in mind, and it went on to dominate world rallying for years, a debt of gratitude it owed, in part, to the little front-wheel drive coupe that came before it, and proved Lancia's engineers could outsmart anyone. That's the twist that makes this story so remarkable. The Fulvia wasn't designed to be a giant killer. It was designed to be practical, elegant, and comfortable. Its rally success wasn't an accident of raw performance. It was the product of one team's willingness to look past horsepower figures and trust in physics, weight distribution, and grip instead. Decades later, restored Fulvia HFs still turn up at historic rallies and classic car auctions, prized as much for that one legendary night as for their looks. Well-kept examples of the fan alone now command serious money among collectors, and the actual car Munari drove, chassis number 14, has been restored and put back on display, scars and all, as a reminder of what it survived. On the right night, in the worst possible conditions, a difference in thinking was enough to beat the fastest cars in the world. The Lancia Fulvia proved that winning isn't always about the biggest engine. Sometimes it's about being lighter, smarter, and better prepared for the moment everyone else fears. Next time you see a classic Lancia badge, remember, it once beat Porsche and Alpine in a blizzard, armed with nothing but grip and guts. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with the next classic car you want us to cover.